Dear viewers and listeners of Khabarhub and Radio Candid, welcome to a very special interview with Sepideh Keyvanshad, Mission Director of USAID Nepal on US-Nepal Development Partnership. Sepideh Keyvanshad serves as a Mission Director of USAID Nepal, a career development professional. Sepideh has worked within the US government in a variety of roles, including the Department of State and the National Security Council, and as a Foreign Service Officer with USAID since 2000. She has been posted overseas with USAID in Afghanistan and El Salvador, and has served with international and non-government organizations in Russia and in Haiti. Sepideh has broad experience working with and across development and governmental institutions, and her career has focused on supporting governance effort as well as institutional and organizational changes around the world. Sepideh holds a MS in Strategic Studies from the National War College and JD from the University of Williams College of Law. She speaks Farsi and Spanish. Ms. Sepideh, welcome to Khabarhub. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me here today and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you and to the viewers on your program on the decades-long friendship between our two countries. So thank you, and it's wonderful to be here.
Ms. Sepideh, let me start with the evolution of USAID. Can you please shed light on the evolution of USAID? How did it begin? What has been the role of USAID been in the process towards a democratic, resilient, and prosperous world?
I would be very happy to speak to that, especially as this month we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of USAID, of USAID's existence. A little bit of a background and a history of USAID. When USAID was created on November 3rd in 1961, it brought together several existing foreign assistance organizations and programs. Until then, there had never been a single agency that was charged with foreign development assistance. And so once we established USAID, the time during the Kennedy and the Johnson administrations became known as the Decade of Development. During the following decades, the focus of international aid shifted with the needs as well as with the political, economic, and social contexts across the world, from addressing basic human needs in the 1970s to the development of free market economies in the 1980s, to sustainability and democracy in the 1990s, and then countering violent extremism in the 2000s. The theme, though, one theme that has always been the case and that remains to this day, is our goal to partner with the countries where we work and to support them in their own development journey and their own development trajectory. The role of USAID has always been and remains today to partner with the countries where we work, to help create the space for all of the different actors, whether it's the government, it's civil society, it's the private sector, it's the communities, to come in, to help them, provide them the tools and the resources to develop a consensus about where they want that development trajectory to take them, and to move along that together. And so ultimately, really, our goal has always been to be a friend to the countries where we work and to be a resource to them.
Ms. Sepideh, you have a variety of experience working on different sectors. So having worked as a special development advisor for Afghanistan and Pakistan, and now mission director of USAID Nepal, how do you view South Asia? According to you, what are the major common development challenges for South Asian countries?
I view South Asia as a varied, diverse, dynamic region of the world. It's true, as you mentioned, I spent a lot of my career working on Afghanistan. I spent part of my career working on Pakistan. I am now working in Nepal. These are all very different countries with different challenges, with different political, economic, social, cultural backgrounds, histories, and issues. Asia is and remains the fastest growing region of the world. And so that is a great thing to see. And at the same time, it comes with its own challenges that its governments, its civil society, its private sector, and its people have to address. One of the key challenges that South Asia, Asia, the entire world is facing right now is to continue to address COVID, to bring it to an end, and ultimately beyond that, to deal with the secondary and tertiary impact of COVID. So that's one challenge that is common among all of them. Another common challenge, and as we see world leaders gathering for COP26, is a challenge of climate change. Some of the countries in this region are contributors to climate change. Others, unfortunately, are incredibly vulnerable to the impacts of it. Nepal is one of the countries that is very much vulnerable and impacted by that. So these are common challenges. There are others, and these are challenges that the region broadly needs to come together and face together and come to common solutions with.
Thank you so much for interesting observation. How do you evaluate 70 years of USAID in Nepal?
I evaluate 70 years of USAID engagement, of the US government engagement in Nepal, as one of very close collaboration, one of partnership, as I mentioned earlier, one of friendship, and it is 70 years of joint, I believe, achievements and accomplishments in many, many areas where our two countries have worked together from the very, very beginning in the 1950s all the way to now. We've seen some great advancements. One of the key advancements that we have jointly been able to accomplish has been in the area of health sector. Health is an area where the US government through USAID has provided a significant amount of resources working together from the beginning. And it's an area where we have seen examples such as bringing malaria to an end, reducing maternal mortality, reducing under 5 child mortality, being able to jointly build health posts. We have together built hospitals and health clinics. One of the most impressive things that I saw, unfortunately for the past year because of COVID, I had not been able to get around the country and see some of the work that we have been doing together. But now that I am able to get out, see this beautiful country, see the work and the communities themselves have been doing, I've been able to see the female community health workers. These are the front lines of the health response in this country, and it's an effort that the US government through USAID working with the Ministry of Health and Population put together in the late 1980s. These are women that come from far across the country to help each other and to be able to provide health services to each other. USAID helped support the first nursing school. So that's only in the area of health. And of course, as we've seen, USAID has been providing an incredible amount of health support when COVID hit Nepal. And we can talk about some of the details of that a bit later. But health hasn't been the only area where USAID has been working with the Nepali people, Nepali civil society, and government. Education is another one. In the area of education right now, we are supporting primary education. We've been providing support in education from the very beginning. Agriculture is another key area of USAID's partnership with Nepal. Nepal is obviously an agricultural society. The GDP of Nepal mostly comes from agriculture. And so improving that sector, making sure that agriculture becomes more productive through the provision of improved tools, seeds, fertilizers, working with farmers to provide them with more technology has been an area of focus for us. Another important part of working in an area with agriculture is to make sure that the farmers are getting the benefits of the work, that they are able to gain from the hard work that they're doing, and that means connecting them to markets. During COVID, it was to connect them through other tools, through digital tools, to be able to sell their products. In terms of civil society, in terms of economic growth. So these are all areas that we've been working together and made a lot of advancements. The one thing I do want to add, though, is that our success, our accomplishments aren't really USAID's accomplishments. Our accomplishments are very much dependent on the partnerships we have with the government, with the people of Nepal. And it really goes back down to the way we work together, the way we engage each other, and the consensus that we built together towards Nepal's own development trajectory.
Ms. Sepideh, what are the top priorities of USAID in Nepal at the moment? What are the reasons behind these top priority areas? What initiatives has USAID been taking to support such priorities?
The response to this question goes back a little bit to my response to the previous questions, which is that the priorities of USAID and the US government in Nepal are the priorities of Nepal itself. Our priorities are the priorities that the government of Nepal has set for itself. For example, Nepal has made a commitment to itself to become a middle income country by 2030. Nepal has made commitments to reach net zero. I believe it was 2050, and that has now been moved, I believe, to 2045. Some of the other goals of Nepal are to improve the lives of Nepali people, to become more competitive economically in the region. And so USAID's goals, our priorities, are Nepal's priorities. And within that, within those goals that Nepal has set for itself, and so our priorities are also to support them in becoming more competitive. So trade and competitiveness, economic growth is a key priority. Improving the lives and the health of Nepalese is another priority. We do that through our health and educational programs. Health and education are generally the foundations of any society that wants to improve, having a healthy, educated population, focusing on sustaining and maintaining the beautiful natural environment of Nepal is another key area where we work. Nepal depends a lot on its tourism. Nepal's tourism is very much dependent on its environment. And so we are continuing to focus in that area, focusing on natural resource management, civil society, working with civil society, having an engaged, informed population is another focus. So those are all of the priorities that we are working on because, as I said earlier, these are Nepal's priorities. I do also want to mention that it is not just what we do, it's not just the programmatic focus that USAID spent a lot of its time on, it's how we do our work. And because of that, we have three threads, three areas of focus that run through everything we do. And those are the concepts of resilience, concept of inclusion, and concept of federalism. For many years, I think we instinctively knew that for a country to develop, it requires an inclusive development. For an economy to grow, it requires inclusive growth. And if there's anything that has been made even more explicit and apparent to all of us across the world, is that inclusion really matters, because as COVID hit, we knew that the people who were most hit, who are the hardest hits, were those who were marginalized, who were vulnerable, and who had not been taken full advantage of this growth. So those are things that we're very focused on through our programming and how we do our programming.
Ms. Sepideh, like as the world is struggling with the pandemic, how does USAID plan to continue its support for Nepal to recover from the brunt of COVID-19?
We have been working with the government mostly, but also with all of its institutions from the very beginning. From I think it was early 2020 when COVID hit Nepal. And in the early stages, the focus of our response was to make sure that we were building up the number of labs who could do testing. We were working with the different health entities to increase response, to increase contact tracing, to provide communication, public messaging in terms of how to keep the population safe. As things got a little bit worse, and especially as the second wave of COVID hit last May, we increased substantially our response in the health sector. We made sure that we brought in the commodities that were needed, that included ventilators, it included oxygen systems, oxygen tanks, oxygen cylinders. It included over 6 million pieces of PPEs, personal protective equipment, to make sure that the health providers remain safe. We provided additional antigen and PCR testing. And in the last couple of months, the latest support that we've been providing has been in the area of vaccines. So in July, we were able to provide 1.5 million doses of the single dose Johnson & Johnson. Just recently, we brought in an additional 100,000 doses of Pfizer. And it wasn't just the 100,000 doses. We worked very closely with COVAX, with our partners, UNICEF, WHO, and the Ministry of Health and Population, to make sure that we had the ultra cold chain, we had the special PPE, we had the special syringes to be able to actually deliver and administer these vaccines. The health support also has not been the only way we've been addressing COVID and helping Nepal, because as COVID hit, it wasn't just people's health that was impacted. Kids were not going to school. And so we had to step in, and we started to support distance learning, working with schools, working with teachers, working with communities. People also started to lose their livelihoods. People lost their jobs. People couldn't get to their jobs. And so we also started to provide support in the term of livelihoods, for example, cash for work. You know, one of the things I saw in my recent field visit to the Dolaka district was providing cash support to women who were building footpaths for their communities, who were building canals for their communities. We were providing support to people who started doing goat farming and vegetable farms. So we've been providing, and we've been trying to provide very comprehensive support to address not just the health impacts of COVID, but really all the other secondary and third order impact. And this is what we've done so far. Unfortunately, COVID is still with us. The pandemic is not over. We all very much hope that there will not be another wave in Nepal, but we are ready to step in if that happens. And if it doesn't, which I hope it doesn't, we all know that recovery from COVID is going to take a long time. It's already impacted the growth of this country. It's already impacted the education of children. I think, from what I understand, many children have already fallen behind by up to a year in their education. Businesses have lost money. So there's a lot that we need to do to bring this pandemic to end, but there's also a lot that we have to do, continue to do as an international community to address the continuing impact of COVID. I do also want to say one word here about all of our development partners here in Nepal. It's not just USAID and it's not just USAID that's been providing support. I think the entire international community here has been a great partner to Nepal. We have worked very closely together to step in and to support, and we're going to continue to do that.
Ms. Sepideh, let's focus on the role of civil societies. According to you, how important is civil society's engagement for development programs? What is their significance?
Civil society is critical. You cannot have development in a country without an engaged, informed civil society. Ultimately, civil society is what makes up a country, and it's civil society, it's whatever form it takes in that country that has to come together. It has to work with the society to develop a consensus about what kind of development, how they want to develop, to work very closely with the government to make sure that the development path and development trajectory that a country takes is something that the entire society wants. Especially important because if you have a divide, if you have a gap between your civil society and your government cannot be successful, but also you are creating an unstable society, because what your society wants and what your government wants are not always necessarily the same thing. The consensus you come to about how people want to live, how they want to behave, the kind of country they want to have you create a divide and a disconnect between them. So civil society is incredibly important. Your civil society is what makes up the country. And the least the divide is, and the more the consensus and the more the engagement is between the civil society and the leaders of the government, the more stable and the more sustainable development you can have for the country.
Ms. Sepideh, just talk about the marginalized people. So how does USAID ensure that it is reaching to the most vulnerable and marginalized people in the country?
I have to start by admitting that that is a difficult thing to do in most countries, because unfortunately, by definition, the vulnerable and the marginalized are very often not involved in decision making. They are the ones from whom decisions are made, and so their voices aren't always heard. We don't even always know where they are and what they're thinking and what they're doing. At the same time, as we've said before, focusing on the marginalized, focusing on the vulnerable, especially in a country like Nepal, is incredibly important. And they are part of your civil society. So the first thing we have to do to incorporate the needs and the voices of the marginalized and the vulnerable is to make sure that becomes a priority focus for us. We have to make sure that it is a primary goal of everything we do. And that's what we've done with USAID. We, as I said, I think previously, inclusion is a thread that really runs across everything we do here, every conversation we have, every concept review we have, every project design we have, and that moves towards the implementation phase. These are the questions we're asking ourselves, and we're also trying to increase our engagement. We're trying to broaden the space that we create for conversation. We're trying to expand the space where we can bring more of civil society that includes the marginalized, and to make sure we are listening to their voices, that we're not making decisions for them. We're not assuming what their issues are, what their challenges are, but we're creating the space for them to come in, to tell us what the challenges are, but also to be involved in the solutions. Because again, we can't assume what the needs of these societies are, but we also can't make decisions for them that doesn't involve them. We can't make decisions, we're not participating in the discussions we have. And so again, it is not always easy, but it is a goal that we've set for ourselves. It's something we take very seriously. It's something that we make sure has become a thread that runs through everything that we do. And at the same time, we are setting objectives and indicators for ourselves. We are holding ourselves accountable to ourselves to make sure that we're measuring what we do, that we're measuring the impact. And then again, we are going back to these societies, to these communities, to make sure that what we're doing is affecting them in a way that is truly helpful for them and makes sense for them.
Ms. Sepideh, what we have seen in recent times is that USAID's focus is shifting to a public-private partnership. How will Nepal benefit from this approach?
I'd like to start actually by saying and reminding everyone that this isn't necessarily a new focus for us. When I joined USAID now a little bit over 20 years ago, we did understand and we were focused on the role of the private sector. Private sector is part of the engine of growth. These are the small businesses, they're the large businesses. These are the entities that ultimately drive the growth of the country. What has changed in the past couple of decades is how we engage the private sector. And in these past couple of decades, we've become more sophisticated in some ways of how we deal with the private sector, how we engage them, how we work with them. We started with what we called public-private partnerships. And in the early days, we would develop a program and then we would go to the private sector and we would ask them, how do you want to be engaged? How are you going to support this objective? What has changed is we're bringing them in the very beginning and we are working on these issues jointly. So they bring in one perspective, they meet part of the objective of our growth, and we do others. So it's now much more of a partnership from the very beginning. It's how do we engage the private sector? How do we work with them? How do we partner with them from the very, very beginning? And they are truly our partners. On the other side of this, on the flip side of this, is how do we also engage the private sector, not just in economic growth, but also in the areas of what we're talking about, which is inclusive economic growth? How do we bring in private sector and how do we work with them for them to also meet the responsibility of improving society, of improving the countries where we work, of making sure that as economy improves, as the GDP goes up, it is more of an inclusive growth and it is targeting the vulnerable, the marginalized, the poor, as we were talking about before. It's also having conversations with the private sector in terms of how are they helping us respond to these other challenges that we've talked about, for example, climate change. How do we grow in a sustainable, green, environmental way that is more inclusive? So again, we working with private sector isn't new, but the way we address it has become refined. It has become more sophisticated in a way. And that's also partly a result of just the shifts that have been happening across the world as we together, all of us, face new challenges. And as we've realized how some of these challenges impact different groups of people differently.
Ms. Sepideh, how has USAID as an agency for development been working towards sustainability of the beneficiaries and ensuring that the recipient countries become self-reliant and resilient?
I think the answer to this question really takes us back to the first question you asked me about the role of USAID and about the evolution of USAID and how we have all been working together. Sustainability depends on how a country's different populations, how the different segment of a society comes together, and the path that a country sets out for itself, the consensus that a country builds of the different segments of this population. And so sustainability is dependent on whether, as a society, that these different groups come together, they come up with a common goal, consensus of where they want to go. They have clear objectives for themselves and they work hard to get to those objectives. Because if you have obviously different parts of society who want different things, you're going to be going in different directions, but the gains you also make are not necessarily going to be sustainable because it's not meeting the needs of everyone. So sustainability really goes back to what we were saying in the very beginning, which is it comes down to partnerships, it comes down to collaborations, it comes down to cooperation, it comes down to consensus. You know, one of the things that I often talk about is the fact that development is very difficult because development inherently by its nature is about change. It's about changing power structures. It's about changing economic structures, social structures, cultural structures. And it's about a society jointly making a decision and a commitment to move forward for the betterment of all of its people. And so to be sustainable, you really have to build on those foundations of that consensus, of those partnerships, on those agreements, and also recognizing that this is incredibly difficult because you have to have a society where everyone feels like they are benefiting from these changes. And so for us, as a US government, as USAID, who is in the business of development, who is in the business of change, we recognize that for us and our programs and our resources and our collaborations to be sustainable, we have to build on that foundation. We have to build on those partnerships and collaborations and consensus within the governments where we are guests, where we come and we work together.
Ms. Sepideh Keyvanshad, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.